Go with your gut. Being an entrepreneur is not a group effort. You have to trust yourself. You may have superb academic credentials, but without instincts, you'll have a hard time getting to and staying at the top. This is one of those gray areas that remain an enigma even to those who have finally honed business instincts. There are inexplicable signs that can guide you to or away from certain deals and certain people. For example, within a few seconds of meeting Mark Burnett, the creator of The Apprentice, I knew he was 100% solid, both as a person and as a professional, which is a remarkable accomplishment in the entertainment industry. On the other hand, I've met people that I have an aversion to for no particular reason, and while I try not to be judgmental, I have reason by now to trust my gut. Carl Jung said our conscious minds use only 5% of our brain power for daily functioning. If we can learn to tap into that unconscious, subconscious, and dormant 95%, the results can be amazing. Be optimistic, but always be prepared for the worst. There are a lot of ups and downs, but you can ride them out if you're prepared for them. Learning to expect problems saved me from a lot of wasted energy, and it will save you from unexpected surprises. It's like Wall Street. It's like life. The ups and downs are inevitable, so simply try to be prepared for them. Sometimes I'll ask myself why I want to take on a new big challenge. A substantial loss is always a possibility. Can I handle it if it doesn't go well? Will I be asking myself later, why did I ever do that? What was I thinking? I'm actually a very cautious person, which is different from being a pessimistic person. Call it positive thinking, with a lot of reality checks. Look closely before changing careers. In 2000, I thought about running for President of the United States as a third-party candidate. I proposed some sensible ideas: tax cuts for the middle class, tougher trade deals, a ban on unregulated soft money in campaigns, comprehensive health care reform. I formed an exploratory committee and met with Reform Party leaders, but in the end I realized I was enjoying my business too much to run for office. Remember the rule I mentioned earlier about how you shouldn't equivocate? That may work for business, but in politics, you usually have to watch your words. I'm too blunt to be a politician. Then there's my long-held aversion to shaking hands. More on this in a moment. Had I entered the race, I wouldn't have been very popular. Even during the few months I was considering candidacy, I noticed that people began to treat me differently, in a more reserved, less friendly way. Before I had been the Donald, someone they would wave and smile at. Suddenly it was a different ballgame, and it didn't seem like much fun to me. One guy I had been friendly with for years saw me at Le Cirque, and for the first time in my life called me Mr. Trump. He'd always called me Donald. That was a real heads-up. A lot of successful business people think they can apply their management skills to politics, but I've noticed that only a select few, like Michael Bloomberg and John Corzine, succeed. Most others lack the temperament for it. There's a larger point here, beyond the obvious ones about not confusing your talent for office politics with a gift for electoral politics. Anyone with more than a little curiosity and ambition will at some point be tempted to try a different challenge on a new terrain. Take the risk, but before you do everything you can to learn what you're getting yourself into, and be as sure as you can that you've got the right mindset for the job. Avoid the handshake whenever possible. Some business executives believe in a firm handshake. I believe in no handshake. It is a terrible practice. So often I see someone who is obviously sick with a bad cold or the flu who approaches me and says, "Mr. Trump, I'd like to shake your hand." It's a medical fact that this is how germs are spread. I wish we could follow the Japanese custom of bowing instead. The worst is having to shake hands during a meal. On one occasion, a man walked out of the restaurant's bathroom jiggling his hands as though they were still wet, and he hadn't used a towel. He spotted me, walked over to my table, and said, "Mr. Trump, you're the greatest. Would you please shake my hand?" I knew that if I didn't shake his hand, he'd be saying terrible things about me for 30 years. I also knew that if I agreed, my own hands would be loaded with germs or whatever the hell he'd carried out of the bathroom. I had a choice. In this case, I decided to shake hands because I was a little overweight at the time and knew that if I shook his hand, I wouldn't eat my meal, and that would be a good thing. Pay attention to the details. If you don't know every aspect of what you're doing down to the paper clips, you're setting yourself up for some unwelcome surprises. I once read about an esteemed brain surgeon in San Francisco who was known for being fanatical about detail and organization. He would go over the components of an upcoming surgery in his head as he jogged every morning. He'd visualize every detail, as if to remind himself of everything he'd learned, every difficulty and complication he might encounter. He wasn't known for his bedside manner, but he was the best. If I had to have brain surgery, he's the kind of surgeon I'd choose. But you don't have to be a brain surgeon to pay attention to the details. Connect with your audience. The Art of Public Speaking, Part 1. One of the problems with my schedule lately is that I am unable to accommodate most of the requests I receive for public speaking. I happen to enjoy giving speeches. I know some people dread the thought of having to give a presentation in a boardroom, let alone appearing before thousands of people. Not me. I get so much energy from my audiences that it is always fun. I bet a lot of you are wondering whether I'm making that up to sound like, oh, I'm not afraid of anything. It's possible I'm forgetting a few stressful moments. Years ago, I was probably nervous about facing an audience, but I got over it. Being afraid of speaking in public is something you can conquer. The following pointers can be applied by people who find presentations, whatever the size of the audience, to be a roadblock on their highway to success. It helps if you are a naturally gregarious person. My driver, Tony, recalls a time when I was going to deliver a speech. When we were about 5 minutes away, I asked Tony what I was supposed to be talking about that night. Tony couldn't hide his shock. He said, "Boss, don't you know? There are 20,000 people waiting for you." I said, "Yeah, but I've been busy. I'm sure it will be okay." I was trying to reassure him. "No go." He said, "Where are your notes? Didn't you make any notes?" I said, "I'm making some now." Tony was looking at me through the rearview mirror with an expression of astonishment. I think he was checking to see whether I was kidding. I wasn't. I'd been asked to give the speech by Anthony Robbins, the best-selling author and self-help guru. I had been paid a great deal of money for the speech, but I'd never asked how many people I would be speaking in front of. As I was leaving the office to go to Philadelphia, my secretary told me I would be speaking at a basketball arena, the Wachovia Center, and that there would be approximately 20,000 people there. I said, "You got to be kidding. I've never spoken before 20,000 people before." That situation could cause panic in some people. Instead, I thought about my audience not as a massive group of people just waiting to judge me, but as individuals who might be there because they're interested in something. Then I started thinking about what people are interested in and the kinds of questions people like to ask me. I was ready. I suddenly had a gut feeling that we were all in for a great time. Leaving an ashen-faced Tony in the car, I hopped out, ready to embrace the experience. Somehow the audience picked up on my energy and got much more than a speech. They got give and take that no one who was there will soon forget. We had a hilarious time, and we walked away having learned a few things as well. Tony Robbins turned out to be a terrific guy. Until I met him, I didn't believe in him or trust him, but that was only because I was getting my information secondhand. Having gotten to know him and his wife, I now wholeheartedly endorse him. He is out to do good and help people. His seminars are absolutely a happening, and after our successful experience in Philadelphia, I agreed to make 10 more appearances. All in all, it was a valuable lesson in public speaking. Think about your audience first. The rest will fall into place. Granted, having useful information to convey will help too. But tuning into people is the first step. I'm good at that, and I don't have to try too hard. Even in my office, with a few people around, the conversation will never be one-sided. I like to involve everyone, and hear what they have to say. So, involve your audience. They will appreciate being included. Cover these 11 bases. The Art of Public Speaking, Part 2. When you're speaking, it helps to be prepared. That may sound funny after what I've just told you, but if you read every day, you will already be prepared. Maybe not for the fine points you are specifically speaking about, but usually we are asked to speak about something we are experts at, or at least familiar with. Cover your bases mentally. Imagine yourself being in the audience. What are you looking for? Being able to trade places with the audience can open you up to a lot of ideas. Have examples and references in mind to back up your statements, and make them as vivid as possible for your listeners. Notes can sometimes function as a useful reference point, especially if you're speaking to a large audience. If you're prepared, no one can tell that you're using them. Ideally, you don't want to read a speech. For some reason, no matter how good your delivery is, when you read a speech, it's usually boring. Everyone sees that you're reading it, and it's never quite the same as delivering it off the cuff. Notes offer the best of both worlds. They keep you focused and moving in the right direction without turning you into a stiff. Be a good storyteller. People like stories, and they'll remember them. A speech shouldn't become a lecture. Humor goes a long way, and it will remind you and everyone else that we've all got a lot of things in common. Storytelling is a skill, so work on it. It's helpful to listen to comedians. The good ones can teach you the art of great timing. Think about the common denominator. How can all of us relate to one another? How can you enable your audience to relate to you and to what you're saying? People see me as a rich and powerful person, but like most people, I also have a daily routine and a family. I get stuck in traffic jams, too. I've known some real gems and some real wackos. I have cranky moments and bad days like everyone else. A lot of your experiences can be understood and appreciated by your audience because they've had them, too. Look for what you have in common and lead with it. You will create an immediate bond because they will realize they can relate to you. When you are on the podium, you are the entertainer. People are there to learn something, but also to be entertained. One reason Elvis Presley was such a great entertainer is that he made every effort to tune in to his audience. It was give and take all the way. Wayne Newton does that too. Even people who thought they wouldn't like Liberace became big fans after experiencing his live shows, and nobody did it better than Sinatra. Some people call it charisma. I call it tuning in and delivering. Study Regis Philbin. He is relaxed and funny, and he always relates to his audiences. They love him. He's a perfect example of the give and take that's necessary for successful public speaking. Regis doesn't just speak, he shares. He's as magnanimous a performer as he is a person. Watch him, pay attention, and you'll learn a lot. Be able to poke fun at yourself. This will make you accessible to people even if you are up on the stage and in the spotlight. We've all had disasters in our lives, major and minor. To be able to laugh at them in retrospect is healthy and helpful. Use the blips that we all encounter in our lives to your advantage. I remember a particular question and answer period that followed one of my speeches, during a time when Ivana and I were going through our divorce and the tabloids were having a field day. The first question was from a guy who asked, "You don't mind if I call you the Donald, do you?" So I responded, "Well, not if you don't mind if I call you Ivana." We all had a good laugh and then proceeded to his real question. Learn to think on your feet. Memorable public speaking involves a good deal of spontaneity. It's a lot like negotiating. You have to focus on your goals, but remain flexible. A lot of people are terrific writers, but not so great at getting their ideas across orally. Writing is a form of thinking, and so is speaking. The difference is that you don't have time to go back and correct yourself when you're on stage. It's not a first draft, and it's not a rehearsal. Be prepared for the performance, because that's what's expected of you. Listen in your daily life. Every day can be a preparation for a speech or a presentation. Have you ever said to yourself, "I'll have to remember that one," after hearing someone say something particularly clever or unusual? Even offhand comments that you overhear can be useful. Remember them. Make notes if you must. Everything and everyone can become material. I was in the back of an elevator once behind a group of guys. Their conversation was so vivid, so real, that I tuned in and tried to figure out why they'd captured my attention. Aside from the fact that they had a captive audience for a short amount of time, I realized that their speaking rhythm was syncopated, quick, and to the point. What they were saying wasn't all that fascinating, but their delivery was. They made a normally mundane subject, what they were getting for lunch and how they were getting it, seem interesting. Have a good time. It's contagious. If your audience believes you are enjoying what you're doing, they'll enjoy being in your company. If it's an obvious chore to you, forget it and find someone else to speak for you. If you're a busy executive, there's probably someone within your organization who can speak effectively in your place. Sometimes when I'm asked to speak and my schedule won't allow it, I will ask someone who works for me if they'd be interested in filling in. Charlie Reese, Executive Vice President of Development in my organization, was a professor at Columbia University before he came to work for me. He's a dynamic speaker, but I wouldn't have known this if I hadn't asked him to help out when I was in a bind. He has a gift for public speaking because he enjoys teaching and is enthusiastic about what he does. At first, I worried he might turn out to be a bit pedantic, considering his background, but he wasn't. Everyone had a good time. Another important aspect of having a good time, before you speak, remind yourself that it doesn't matter all that much. Don't feel that the weight of the world is on you. Most of the people in the room don't care how well or poorly you do. It's just not that important. It's merely a speech, not an earthquake or a war. You'll have a better time and be a better speaker if you keep it all in perspective. That said, public speaking and presentations may be a necessary step on your ladder to success. For quick reference, here's my procedure for discovering a talent you thought you didn't have. Number 1, think about your audience first. Number 2, get your audience involved. Number 3, be prepared. Number 4, be a good storyteller. Number 5, be aware of the common denominator. Number 6, be an entertainer. Number 7, be able to laugh at yourself. Number 8, think on your feet. Number 9, listen. Number 10, have a good time. And of course, number 11, study Regis Philbin. Change your altitude. When I say altitude, I'm not referring to my jet. It's my own interpretation of the word attitude. I like flying because it gets me where I'm going fast. Likewise, if you have the right attitude, you can get where you're going fast. What's the altitude of your attitude? Is it high frequency or low frequency? Having a high frequency will attune you to a wavelength that exudes confidence and a clear-sighted enthusiasm. I'm a firm believer that this is half the battle of any enterprise. I'm a tough-minded optimist. I learned a long time ago that my productivity was increased by a large percentage simply by learning to let go of negativity in all forms as quickly as I could. My commitment to excellence is thorough, so thorough that it negates the wavelength of negativity immediately. I used to have to zap negativity mentally. By now, it just bounces off me within a moment of getting near me. As you may have heard, I don't like germs. I'm still waging a personal crusade to replace the mandatory and unsanitary handshake with the Japanese custom of bowing. To me, germs are just another kind of negativity. Negativity is also a form of fear, and fear can be paralyzing. On the golf course, I've heard great athletes tell me that they can't putt. They can hit a ball 300 yards right down the middle of the fairway, but they can't finish the hole by putting the ball 3 feet into the cup. Recently, I played with a man who was terrified of putting. He hit a magnificent 235-yard shot and was 7 feet from the cup. Then he looked over at me and said, "Now the hard part begins." Another friend, also a great golfer, is paralyzed by his fear of losing his ball. Each time we played a hole near a lake, he would look down and say to his ball, "I have a feeling I'll never see you again." I have told these guys that they must start thinking positively, or they will sabotage themselves. Very often, negative thinking stems from low self-esteem. You have to work on this yourself. Maybe you've received a lot of hard knocks. I've learned to deal with them because I get knocked a lot. Quickly see them for what they are, knocks. But you don't have to open the door unless you choose to. I've gotten to the point where I see knocks as opportunities and as an insight into whoever is doing the knocking. One way to chase low altitude away is to think about how fortunate you already are and how much you still have to look forward to. You can better your best day at any time. Very surprising things can happen, but you must, and I repeat, must, be open to them. How can you fly if you've already clipped your own wings? I don't have time to encourage as many people as I would like to, but whenever it seems appropriate, I recommend The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, one of my father's favorite books, and mine too. Some people may think it's old-fashioned, but what Peale has written will always be true. He advocates faith over fear. Faith can overcome the paralysis that fear brings with it. I can remember a time when I had a choice to make. When I was billions of dollars in debt, I had to take one of two courses of action, a fearful, defensive one, or a faithful, riskier one. I carefully analyzed the situation, realized what was causing the uneasy feeling of fear, and immediately replaced it with blind faith, simply because I had nothing else to go on at the time. Then I resolved that as long as I remained positive and disciplined, things would work out. There was not much more I could do. I didn't know how it was going to go, but I was determined to move forward, even though it wasn't easy. Within a relatively short amount of time, the situation was settled positively. I learned a lot from that and have since had a better understanding of what courage really is. Without facing my own fear, I would not have known. When I think of someone who is tough, I also think of someone who has courage. People who persist have courage, because often it's a lot easier to give up. Some of the bravest people I've met are children with handicaps. I'm active with United Cerebral Palsy. What those kids deal with is humbling, but they are enthusiastic and thrilled with every day they've been given. You've been given a day too. When you're down, look at it that way. Another day can equal another chance. Sometimes, as obvious as it sounds, we really do have to take things one day at a time. Immediately after the events of September 11th, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we all kept going, one day at a time, and we're still moving forward. Maybe you've gotten to the point where you think you can't get through another day. That's short-sighted of you. You're missing the big picture. You're on the runway, but your fuel supply is the problem. You won't get off the ground without it. Feed yourself some positive thoughts, and you can take off at any time. Ever wonder what makes certain people keep going? I do. Abraham Lincoln encountered a steady procession of setbacks, but he just kept at it. Nothing deterred him. He must have had a lot of faith because he didn't receive much encouragement along the way. He's an excellent example of someone who never gave up. The other extreme is a person who seems to run into obstacles with the unerring aim of a marksman. I knew a guy who was remarkably accident-prone. If there was something to run into, he'd find it. If there was a hole in the ground, he'd break his foot by stumbling into it. Once he was in such a slam-bang accident that he was hospitalized for 6 months before being completely patched up. Finally, the day of his release from the hospital arrived, and it was decided that he should get an ambulance ride home just to be on the safe side. As the ambulance was taking him home, it crashed into a car. Another spectacular slam-bang accident. My friend was immediately brought back to the hospital in a new ambulance dispatched to the scene of the disaster. What can I say? Maybe he's just a really unlucky guy. Or maybe he's a loser. I know that sounds harsh, but let's face it. Some people are losers. The altitude level of losers is so low that they should walk around in scuba gear all day. They are below sea level on the altitude map. We all know people like that, and they might make great comedians because they have so much material, but first they'd have to learn to be funny. Honestly, I've known people who are such accomplished losers that I think that's what they devote their time to. How can I be the biggest screw-up possible? How can I prove the born loser theory to be correct? How can I defy the law of probability to make it an absolute disaster every time? How can I achieve a perfect record of total wipeouts? How far can I get at 0 miles per hour? How can I reach the lowest frequency possible? How can I operate so that radar could never possibly find me even if I get lost, which I probably will? These people need a new speedometer. Get going, move forward, aim high, plan for a takeoff. Don't just sit on the runway and hope someone will come along and push the airplane. It simply won't happen. Change your attitude and gain some altitude. Believe me, you'll love it up here.